In this class we're going to look at business research methods. Now this class overlaps significantly with other videos in this module. So it's important to look at the other videos in conjunction with this one. The material overlaps. Some of the material covers the same areas. It'll just be treated in a slightly different way. So it's important to look at the other videos as well. However, to start, let's look at business research methods and introduce this topic. First of all, let's start with the meaning of research. First of all, it's a search for solutions. It's a search for knowledge. That's what research is. It's looking for solutions. Generally speaking, we consider it to be a scientific or systematic search for pertinent information on a specific topic. When we say scientific, we mean using logic. It's not haphazard, it's not random, it's systematic. It's going about the process of getting information in a methodical manner. It's a movement from what we know to what we don't know. It's trying to find out what we don't know. It identifies a problem and it tries to solve the problem. Or it conducts research into an area in the expectation or in the hope of finding something new. Now the definition, well, it's a careful investigation into some problem, issue, or topic of interest, using past research to determine new facts. Where possible, past research should always be used, should always be consulted, because past research it's a body of experience. It incorporates experience, the experience of the researchers back at that time. And we can learn from that. We can learn from their sources and from their definitions and from the problems they encountered and the recommendations they have made. So past research is always important. So the research method is an investigation into some problem, into some issue that arises. Let's say within a business. Within the business there is a problem about the administration, how the administration is organized. So the problem will relate to the administration and conduct research into the best way to organize the administration of the business. There are various steps in the research process. Careful analysis of the problem or research area. Well, that's important. Nobody can argue that careful research is not important. It has to be careful research. And use previous research in the area and the wider literature published on the topic to formulate hypotheses. A hypothesis is a testable statement. It's a statement that says, if we do this, production will increase. That's our hypothesis. If we change the way the production line is set up, production will increase. That is our hypothesis. Now, can it be tested? And if it's tested and it works, the hypothesis is confirmed. If it is tested and it doesn't work, the hypothesis is rejected. So it's setting up a hypothesis that may be tested. Capturing the data that is necessary to test a hypothesis is important. The hypothesis is only tested against data. It's tested against actual results to see if it works or it doesn't. And it's important to have the skills necessary and the resources to analyze the data and turn it into information. Data are just the facts, but when the data is processed and analyzed, it becomes information. It becomes useful. And when we've got information, we can draw conclusions. The conclusion is to accept or reject a hypothesis. So if we look at this very carefully, we start with identifying a problem. We then draw up a hypothesis. The hypothesis is to solve the problem. If we do this, the problem will be solved. If we do this or stop doing that, the problem will be solved. That's our hypothesis. Now we collect some data to test the hypothesis. Then we analyze the data, and then we conclude. We conclude that the hypothesis should be rejected. The solution does not work. Or the hypothesis should be accepted. The solution perhaps does work. And that's, in one slide, a good explanation of the scientific approach. Now let's look at the objectives of research. Well, the objectives are to investigate a phenomenon so as to gain an understanding into it, to understand the thing. It's called exploratory research. We sometimes conduct research to try and find out how something works. Why is this good practice, or what's the logic in the situation? We also have research to discuss the issues and to illustrate any insights gained. So we conduct the research to look at an issue, to look at production within the business, or how the marketing section is functioning. That's the issue. Let's deal with that issue. Let's research into that issue and see what the research can turn up. Are the processes good? Is the business being conducted efficiently? What's the hypothesis? And sometimes research is conducted simply to examine the phenomena and the relationships between different phenomena. For example, within the business, how is information communicated between the marketing department and production and the stores? If the marketing section are receiving orders, are the orders being communicated to the stores so raw materials are being bought in? And is the stores communicating to production so that the raw materials are being converted into the products that meet the orders? So how is it working? Investigate the relationship. And research may be conducted to see if a better way of doing that is possible. Now let's move to the types of research. Well, first of all, we have descriptive. As the name suggests, descriptive research describes phenomena. It paints the picture. It describes what the phenomena is. It's descriptive. There's nothing else we can say about it. The researcher has no control over variables under investigation. He or she reports the facts as they are. It's as straightforward as that. Applied research, well, it's focused on solving an immediate problem. If there's a problem within the business, we would have applied research, try to fix the problem, research into ways in which the problem may be fixed. Fundamental research is focused on gaining an insight into some fundamental concept. Now, this is different to the applied research. Fundamental research is research for research's sake. It's trying to add to our knowledge. This is what happens at universities and big research institutions. The people at CERN with a particle accelerator are looking into fundamental physical relationships, looking at particles and the properties of particles. Students may study mathematics and study what may appear to be very obscure areas in mathematics. And this is adding to our understanding, our body of knowledge as a species. As human beings, we're getting a greater insight into these phenomena and into these areas. So the research leads to a greater understanding of underlying relationships. Some of these relationships may have practical implications in the future. Sometimes it may not be obvious, but the research may give us an insight into something much later, and which will help us. For example, in the areas of computing and the research done in mathematics, which has helped us to understand a lot of advanced computing and how computing has developed right from Charles Babbage and the early efforts at computing right up to the modern day computers. A lot of this was built on principles in mathematics which were at the time worked out and no one saw what use they would be, and they turned out to be very useful. We also have quantitative research. This is looking at numbers. It's collecting data and to analyze the data. It uses advanced statistical techniques. It collects data and tries to process the data into information, so it becomes useful for decision making. We also have qualitative research. This is concerned with attitudes and human behavior and motivation and opinions. It uses a variety of approaches, for example, interviews, focus groups, storytelling, and attitudinal surveying. So qualitative research is important because it gives us a much richer picture of issues than perhaps just collecting data would. But there are many problems in this type of research, problems of bias, for example, which are again dealt with in other videos and dealt with extensively in other videos. But care must be taken when looking into, for example, attitudes, that the research activity itself is not distorting the responses, or that the people interviewed were selected in a very biased fashion that would lead to biased results. There's also conceptual and what we call empirical research. Empirical means done by experiment. Empirical is normally conducted by physicists and chemists and people dealing with the natural sciences. Conceptual research is that related to some idea or theory. It's a quest for knowledge in its own sake. It could lie in the province of mathematics, for example, like we talked about a few moments ago. It's looking at concepts, and it's researching into concepts, researching into the meaning of concepts or the relationship between concepts. Empirical research, by contrast, is experiment or observation to test some hypothesis. So the hypothesis could be that within particles there exists a subatomic particle, whatever, and the people will, at CERN, will accelerate the particles and crash them into each other to see if that subatomic particle exists. As it turns out, they did find a very important one, the Higgs boson subatomic particle. But what next? The human condition is always to push it to the frontier, keep on pushing. What's the next layer? And try to investigate what is next. Research doesn't stop, it carries on. And number 3, we have experimental research. If the hypothesis is capable of testing by appropriate research techniques, this is experimental research. The researcher designs the experiment, and in this context he/she is active in the research design. So experimental research, the researcher has a hypothesis that there is a relationship between two phenomena, perhaps in the natural sciences, in physics or in biology or whatever, and then tries to engineer ways in which that may be tested. That's experimental research. Empirical research done by experiment. We often call research in economics or in sociology or in many areas, we call it empirical. It means practical. It's done by experiment. It's looking at relationships in numbers, and it's empirical. It's not dealing with concepts. So the empirical research, first of all, develop a working hypothesis, usually from past research or literature or some problem. For example, metal stock holding in the car industry is determined by movements in the exchange rate. Now that is a business statement. The metal stock holdings in the car industry is determined by the exchange rate. Now, isn't that true? Can we test it? Now we need to collect some data on the metal stock holdings and changes in the exchange rate to test this hypothesis. And once we've collected the data, we apply some numerical technique, for example regression analysis in statistics, or we may do some correlation coefficient analysis, or various statistical tests. Perhaps some very sophisticated statistical tests are brought to bear on the data to see if we can establish or otherwise a relationship between metal stock holding and the exchange rate in the car industry. So this form of research is used when testing a hypothesis is important. It's empirical. Next we have exploratory and formalized research. Exploratory research, well, the purpose of exploratory research is to develop hypotheses. It's exploring. So it's exploring some situations, trying to develop a hypothesis. It reviews the literature and studies the problem and then sets out a plan for subsequent research if required. It's exploring. It's looking at the problem and it's looking to see if it can be tested. It's looking to see what hypothesis is most suitable. What does the literature say? Is there any past research? It's exploring. It's exploratory research. It's not testing the hypothesis itself. It's exploring what was done in the past. What's the literature say? What is the problem? It's exploring. Formalized research. These are very well structured and substantial studies that test specific hypotheses. I got this as a plural, hypotheses, ES. If it's IS, it's singular, one hypothesis. Hypotheses, several. So formalized research is research that is carried out very precisely under very tight conditions. It's very formal. It sets out the hypothesis precisely. It sets out its methodology very precisely. It shows all the issues in data collection, the type of analysis done, the limitations of the research. It's very formalized, very strict. So it's different to exploratory. It's very formal. So in this video we've looked at different types of research. We've looked at the research issue and how research is structured and the types. So many issues here, but you will find that this overlaps with other videos, as I keep saying. So look at the other videos as well and deal with this one in conjunction with those. So it's part and parcel of the overall thrust of the module. That's all I'm going to do on this topic, so I'm going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.